Well, a hearty shalom to you. Jeffrey Seif here. Glad you are walking with me to and through the Hebrew Bible the way Jews do it. The Hebrew Bible is divided up into reading segments. Every week, Jewish folk kind of work through a section of the Torah, and all that is preserved here in the Tree of Life version of the Bible. Of course, there's Haftorah or other readings, and then New Testament readings as well for those of us who are believers in Yeshua. Glad you're interested in taking a look at the book from a Jewish lens, and we are in Parashat Ekev this week. Very interesting story here. The story takes place against the backdrop of this newer generation having emerged, who were then vested with authorization to go take the promised land. They're going to go military in short order. They've won some battles east of Canaan, and they've suffered some defeats as well. They just walked through a heinous one where over 20,000 died because of sexual improprieties, interestingly. Well, Moses is here giving a pep talk, if you will. He'll be dead in reasonably short order, and he's speaking to the younger generation who were born during the wilderness trek, or if they weren't born during that segment of the journey, they were very young. These are the ones that are going to bear arms now to take care of business. And in Parashat Ekev, beginning in chapter 7, verse 12, he says, "Then it will happen as a result of your listening to these ordinances, when you keep and do them, that Adonai your God will keep the covenant kindness that he swore to your fathers." In other words, he wants them to know, if you do this, then God will do that. God's performing is predicated upon their compliance. Now, we don't like that today, I'll tell you straight up. We are typically game to look at the biblical drama and its implication for us through a lens that says, listen, you can't work, it's all the grace of God, and we're just on for the ride, and there is no conditions to this. And I do understand that. I'm sympathetic toward that, and there is a grain of truth to that. Here, however, when we hear the text, and it's not just here, it's ubiquitous in Deuteronomy, as with the Old Testament on the whole, and even in the New, that, no ticky, no ride. You have to comply. People can say, well, I went to a Billy Graham crusade, 8 years ago, and I asked Jesus Christ into my heart, and I'm saved, and, you can't earn your salvation. My God, we don't want to be like those Jews. And yes, I know I go to bars every other night, and I'm having an affair right now with my fourth wife. And yes, I do have a problem with drug addiction, but you can't tell me I'm not saved because it's all by grace. Now look, Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits, not that you'll know them by their toots. It's not those that talk the talk, it's those that walk the walk, or your feet into the game, and people would bear fruit accordingly. There's no free meals on wheels. At the end of the day, God is willing to, through the gospel, push the reset button and let people start all over again, but we all have to build a life. And here, when we look in chapter 7, the author is clarifying that we want to build that life on biblical virtues, that success in life is in fact predicated upon our so doing. You can't say, I'm a Jew, but God's given us the promised land, it's the land of my destiny, and so be it. That faithfulness is needed to get into the land, and faithfulness is needed to stay in the land. And if you're not faithful, then you're going to be uprooted from the land. But because God is faithful, in the place of your exile, we learn in the prophets, and later on in Deuteronomy, if you call upon the Lord, he'll bring you back, and we can push the reset button again and try it again. But one must needs comply with the scriptures. Now, it's interesting to me that some say, well, yeah, that's right, you got to keep the commands, and this means we're going to do Saturday instead of Sunday, and this means that we're going to say Yeshua instead of Jesus. See, we're all about keeping the commands. What that does is that reduces what the commands are all about in a way that doesn't really comport with the sensibilities of the literature. The reason why I say that is when Moses speaks here, those hearers wouldn't have heard, well, to keep the command means that I go to church on a Saturday instead of a Sunday, and I call the leader a rabbi instead of a reverend. There's no church to go to. There's no synagogue to go to. Synagogues don't even emerge for centuries. Keeping the commands, well, that means I got to read the Bible every day. No, because they didn't have printing presses. They would gather, and the priest would articulate the essence and the substance. And when they did gather, this entailed, by the way, the Shabbat, the family gathering together weekly to recharge the batteries, to reconnect with one another. But as we go on through this, some of the commands that they need to keep aren't particularly relevant, because right before this and then right after this, these people, as I'd said, they're about to bear arms and go off to war and take the land of Israel. And these are commands that they need to adhere to when they're in the land of Israel. Well, we're not working within a particular kind of territory, and we're not contending for it militarily, if you will. So there's a sense in which our situation in life is different, but we do have commonalities here. In chapter 10, he beckons them, if you'll turn there, to circumcise their hearts and to be kindly disposed toward the poor, to the disenfranchised, to the widow, and to remember that he says it explicitly, you yourself were once that way, and so you want to be kindly disposed toward those who are. Inasmuch as I've given you a hand to lift you up, so you too want to participate in lifting up others. I like this element of the command because it has to do with the virtues, with the ethics, and it's less attached to the kind of minutiae that we make much of today. Now, I personally and my wife, I come from Jewish parents, and my wife Barry does. We participate in a Messianic Jewish congregation, which I and we are pleased to lead. We're very happy to visit churches too. We frequent, in fact, we're heading off to Omaha, well, it's not a church, to Omaha, Nebraska to speak in a Messianic synagogue this weekend. When you're hearing this, we'll be in Omaha if you're hearing it over the weekend. And then we get invited to speak in churches. So I'm not the least bit hostile toward my Christian friends that aren't particularly attached to a Jewish cultural way of celebrating, as I am, and as Barry and as our congregation is. But the ethical elements in all this, to remove the hardness from the heart, to be kindly disposed, to be loving and caring and sharing, I mean, it is an essential virtue. And let me just tell you, if you opt to live that way, it'll be a boomerang. That is, you throw a boomerang out and it's going to come back and hit you in the head. And for those that make a decision to be ethical, moral, kindly disposed toward others, to be sharing and caring, that's going to come back and get you in a good way, I might add. Well, speaking of way, as I said at the outset, thanks so much for turning our way here with the Tree of Life Bible Society. And thank you for supporting our work. This is a project put together. It emerged out of Danya Greenberg's heart, but so many men and women got together into the game to want to tender a Jewish translation of the text. And the society is well at work doing other things as well. And let me just say as I close, thank you for your prayerful support of all we do, and whatever financial support. We certainly appreciate that as well. Well, blessings to you, and I'll come back next week. Ciao.